Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to another explainer. Let's jump right into it. Today we're opening up Chapter 16 of Nāgārjuna's Mūlamadhyamakakārikā. Now, as you know from our deep dives into the previous chapters, Nāgārjuna doesn't just hand us philosophy. He offers a rigorous, clinical dissection of reality itself. And here in Chapter 16, which is all about analyzing being bound and released, he points his scalpel at the absolute core of the Buddhist path, the very concepts of bondage in samsara and liberation in nirvāṇa.
I want to challenge you right out of the gate with the central paradox we're looking at today. If we frame samsara as this reified, solid state of suffering, and nirvāṇa as some absolute ontological destination we just have to escape to, aren't we just freezing reality into another rigid duality? Seriously, if you inherently seek liberation, aren't you just grasping at yet another conceptual illusion? We'd basically be turning the cure into a brand new disease.
So here's our game plan for this 11-step diagnostic explainer. We'll be mapping the ultimate triad, running the tetralemma stress test, looking at emptiness and dependent co-origination, transcending the conceptual grid, discussing conventional tools, and finally, abiding in primordial suchness.
All right, let's get started with part 1, mapping the ultimate triad.
You know how our minds work when we try to analyze reality. Biological edge detection kicks in, and we naturally just carve things up into separate, neat little categories. Well, step 1 of our analysis identifies these 3 specific spheres. First, you have opposite 1, which is bondage-in-samsara, basically the transmigrating state. Second, you've got opposite 2, liberation-in-nirvana. And third, you have the relation, opposition, or union between those two. Now, our cognitive default, this disease of reification we all have, assumes these are independent entities with absolute inherent essences. We just assume there's a real solid boundary that we have to cross.
Moving on to Part 2, the tetralemma stress test.
Okay, step 2 is where it gets intense. We need to aggressively force these 3 spheres, bondage, the union or opposition, and liberation, through the 4 corners of Madhyamaka logic. Nāgārjuna opens the chapter by looking at the actual mechanics of transmigration. Like, what exactly is transmigrating? Is it a being? Is it the 5 aggregates? We have to test these across all logical extremes. Existent versus non-existent, continuous versus discontinuous, eternal versus annihilated. Think about it. If we claim the aggregates or a being are inherently continuous, then they're functionally eternal. But an eternal, permanent thing cannot be bound, right? And it absolutely cannot be released, because an eternal essence literally never changes. It makes the whole spiritual path impossible. On the flip side, if we say they're inherently discontinuous, then they're annihilated moment by moment. That means the aggregates that are supposedly bound are completely severed from the aggregates that are released. That utterly destroys the logic of karma and causal progression. There'd be no one left to even experience the release. So both continuity and discontinuity totally fail. Now let's test samsara and nirvana for difference and identity. Are they inherently identical? Well, if they are mathematically identical in an absolute sense, the distinction collapses completely. The illness and the cure are exactly the same thing. That's absurd. Okay, so are they inherently separate, completely different? If they are absolutely separate, they have closed-loop essences. An absolute boundary literally cannot be crossed. If samsara is completely separate from nirvana, nothing could ever change. The universe would just be permanently stuck in duality. Nāgārjuna's verses here brilliantly dismantle the very mechanics of bondage. He points out that if a being is inherently already bound, then binding them is redundant. You can't bind what's already absolutely bound. But if a being is inherently unbound, bondage can't attach to it, because an unbound essence would naturally repel limitation. So we've demonstrated that these 3 spheres cannot be existent, non-existent, both, or neither. They can't be different, identical, both, or neither. Separate, united, multiple, one, dual, non-dual. You get the picture. Permanent, impermanent, continuous, discontinuous, eternal, annihilated. This, non-this, both or neither. For whatever this is supposed to be, every single one of those extreme positions just collapses into contradiction and absurdity when you try to apply it inherently.
Which naturally brings us to Part 3, emptiness and dependent co-origination.
Because all the extremes of the tetralemma have been systematically demolished under logical scrutiny, we arrive at step 3. These 3 spheres, bondage, opposition, and liberation, are completely empty of inherent existence by logical necessity. They are never absolute. Because there are no inherently established opposites to begin with, there is no real opposition or relation between them. The boundary is fundamentally porous simply because it lacks any standalone, independent essence.
Step 4 naturally follows right on the heels of that. If they lack independent essence, how do they actually exist?
Well, they're inseparable. They are dependently co-originated, interdependent, co-defined, co-emergent, and co-evolving. It's kind of like the duality of a parent and a child. You can't just have the absolute identity of a parent floating in a vacuum. The existence of the child is literally what gives birth to the parent. In the exact same way, bondage and liberation are co-imputed by the mind. They are mere designations, just names, conventional truths, tools we use to navigate our relative reality.
And this brings us to an incredibly profound realization for step 5. We have to note the union of the two truths operating across these three spheres. Relatively speaking, yes, they are highly useful conventions. Ultimately, they are never absolute. Therefore, the union of the two truths about the three spheres is the exact meaning of the union of opposites. The fact that these absolute boundaries are empty is exactly what allows for the fluid, functional transition from bondage to liberation.
All right, part 4, transcending the conceptual grid.
Step 6 gives us our phenomenological framework. We conclude that these spheres, bondage, opposition, liberation, are exactly like illusions, reflections, mirages, dreams, or echoes. Even the 5 aggregates themselves, transmigrating through samsara, are merely an echo. Now, conventionally, an echo is undeniably there, right? It has a real, functional causal impact. You can hear it. But if you try to physically locate its inherent core, to grab it, it just slips right through your conceptual grasp. It is an interdependent event. It's there, yet not there.
For steps 7 and 9, we have to be super careful not to take this concept of emptiness and turn it into a new, rigid box. We use the generalized tetralemma to affirm that these three spheres are not this, not non-this, not both, and not neither. And there's no secret fifth option for whatever this is. Their true nature is entirely beyond all conditioned, dualistic conceptual proliferation. It's utterly beyond all of our models, triads and dyads. So the absolute best attitude toward them is the middle way, which is entirely free from all extremes, this or non-this, and totally free from the middle of both or neither. The middle way completely rejects objectivism and realism. It rejects subjectivism, idealism, solipsism, and nihilism. It bypasses relationism and processism, and it cuts straight through dualism, pluralism, monism, and radical oneness.
That leads us into part 5, conventional tools, absolute freedom.
So, if everything is basically an ungraspable echo, how do we actually function? Step 10 dictates that we can and should use these concepts conventionally and relatively. They are highly useful tools, but we can never use them in absolute terms. Think about the classic Buddhist metaphor of the raft. You use these dualities and concepts as a heavy wooden raft to cross the turbulent river of samsara, but the moment you reach the other shore, you don't pick the raft up and carry it on your back. We use the tools without attachment, without reification, without effort or absolutes. We utilize them fully, all while knowing their true empty nature. Finally, part 6, abiding in primordial suchness, dropping the raft.
Having systematically ripped up every conceptual floorboard beneath our feet, we reach step 11. Once that raft is dropped, we might as well perceive everything as primordially equal, pure, perfect, complete, divine, and one, completely transcending concepts of many, one, both, or neither. We just abide in reality exactly as it is, suchness. It's this luminous, interdependent web where the shared emptiness of all things reveals their profound primordial equality.
To wrap up this rigorous analysis today, we arrive at this massive, ultimate realization. Nothing really exists and changes in an inherent sense. There is absolutely no inherent continuity, nor inherent discontinuity of anything. Not the 5 aggregates, not a being, not a self, or a continuum, or action, or karma, or the cycle of rebirth itself. This holds true from one moment to the next, from one action to the next, from one rebirth to the next, or from samsara to nirvana. Literally nothing is inherently being bounded and reborn in samsara, and nothing is inherently released in nirvana.
And here is Nāgārjuna's absolutely devastating, beautiful paradigm shift. There is no inherent difference or separation between samsara and nirvana. When we finally stop our compulsive attempts to freeze the river of dependent origination, we can participate flawlessly in the conventional world without being crushed by the weight of absolute extremes.
So I'm going to leave you with this to mull over. In that exact fraction of a microsecond, right before your mind imputes the very next concept, before it slaps a rigid label or a boundary between self and other, between bondage and freedom, what actually exists in that silent gap? When the illusion of the boundary completely collapses, Who is the one being bound, and who is actually being liberated? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer on Nāgārjuna's 16th chapter. I'll catch you on the next one.